Alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the World of Shakespeare. You are listening and watching Riphah FM 102.2. This is your host Areeba Saleem. Listeners, as you know that we have started this program to talk about fiction, to talk about Shakespeare's writing, to talk about the legacy of Shakespeare, to talk about how he contributed to English literature. And my participant in this discussion is Naqiya Zainab Alvi. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. So let's start another literary discussion about Shakespeare's genres of writing. So his work is majorly categorized into three categories: tragedy, comedy, and history. And as well as we will also talk about the condition of women in his era and how he portrayed the characters of women in his writing. So let's start the discussion. So Nakia, what is your opinion about that era? And I think that that era was also a strict patriarchal society of England, and women were not allowed to do the work according to their will.
Of
So
course, of course. When we talk about Shakespeare, we talk about Elizabethan era, right? And Elizabethan was a very fierce patriarchal society in which it was determined what a woman could and could not do. So, like, for example, they were not allowed to go or attend any school or university, not even
yes,
basic education was available for them. So, what happened, they couldn't go into professions like medicine or law that actually required very advanced knowledge, that only came through universities. And that also meant, also there were some guilds, these kind of places that trained in actual real life skills, right, in carpentry and these kind of stuff. They also didn't admit women officially, right? They
yes,
used to hire them for labor and stuff, but they didn't legally hire them because they weren't allowed to. The only things that were legally available in basically the Elizabethan era were that could be mastered at home.
yes, the
So,
only arts that can be practiced at home
exactly.
were designated to women, like
Exactly.
hat making.
Making, brewing, and
Yes,
poetry and that kind of stuff.
yes,
These
music as well.
exactly. So this is what baffles me is that even the most at that time the most discarded profession was acting, and even
Yes,
that was not allowed for women. That even the female parts that were in plays, male actors used to
used to
act
play
them.
that
Yeah,
characters.
which
Yes,
is like beyond
yes,
funny.
and they were also restricted from voting. That is the basic right,
Exactly.
but they were not allowed to vote as well at that time.
Exactly. So also what came with that is that they did not have the right to purchase property. They could inherit it from their father or husband, but they could not themselves go and purchase some land or your property. That, that is a big kind of power that comes with it, in
Yes,
identifying yourselves and owning something that is yours.
and the sermons and the holy scriptures of that time were also like encouraged the women to be silent and to be obedient to their male counterparts. So that also adds to the situation.
Exactly.
And if we look at the marriage structure, so that also adds to that patriarchal structure that women, the legal age of women to get married was 12 at that time.
Yeah, as low as well. Even though, like, what I'm glad about that, even at that time, that was considered in a society, it was considered too young.
Yes,
The fathers were like, okay, no, my daughter is already. So it happened in late teens or like early 20s. But yeah, the legal age was 12, which is like, oh my God, that's a child.
yes,
So yeah, and what happened is that even though they did get want to get married in their late teens or 20s, who they did want to marry or who they get married to
yes.
was highly dependent on what their father wanted, and the marriage was more political than it was
Yes, it was
about
not
love.
about love or
Yeah,
compatibility. It was all
exactly.
about politics. It was all about inheritance, property.
Exactly. So it was basically a monetary exchange, and
Yes,
this also enhances the the role of dowry and that kind of thing. That okay, people used to get married to the woman that will give them more dowry. That was a big concept at that time as
yes.
well. So
So,
it was always a financial transaction at that
and
time.
I think it was like that the husband owned his wife at that time.
Exactly.
And Shakespeare reflects this condition in his play The Taming of Shrew. And When the character Petruchio referred to his wife as my goods, my chattel, my ox, my ass, my anything. So this shows that how the ownership of a woman was given to the husband after marriage.
Exactly. So what happened was, it was like the transfer of power from the father to the
Yes.
husband.
Yes.
And what happened is that this because of this, like the legal, being the legal guardian of his wife, what happened is that this whole society actually really encouraged men to be have this tremendous anxiety over women not obeying them. Like if the woman
Mm.
is a little deceiving or little, defying to their rules or something like that, oh, they are towards infidelity, they are committing
Yes.
some crime.
Yes.
And this is what we also see in Othello with
Mm.
Desmonda. Actually, her husband, they was that was a love marriage in that society. And what happened,
Mm.
just because he was so anxious over her not actually aligning her views with the
Mm.
patriarchy, what happened at the end, he killed her, just because
Yes.
he thought mistakenly that he believed that she had committed infidelity against him. So that was just
Yes, and Nakia, we know that society was patriarchal at that time, but society was ruled by a woman. The Queen Elizabeth was ruling at that time. So this is also a paradoxical situation that a woman is ruling, but the society is still patriarchal. So we see that during his time, Shakespeare time, majority of his life, a woman occupied the throne, and unmarried woman at that time. He wrote them, I have a body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. So this shows, how she has to reassure his power over
yeah,
the male
of
society,
course.
male dominant society.
Of course, because being a woman and a single woman at that time, right? That kind of rules and regulation happening, being the queen, of course, comes with a lot of doubt from the male
Yes.
troops, and reassuring them again and again that no, that I am worthy of the position. And which is surprising is that her reign was stable throughout. It
Hmm.
wasn't breaking out, male
Yes.
trying to break in. No, I want it. Like she's in deserving of the throne or that kind of thing. It was politically stable uh, era,
Yes.
basically.
So we see that the period between 1595 and 1620, we also see a sharp increase in the number of dispute and separation between aristocratic wives and their husband. So we see that the Elizabeth gave some power to the women during her time
Yeah,
period.
she inspired women to be a bit, more independent. But what happened was that also led to the development of shrew, which basically is
Yes,
those um, aggressively assertive women
women.
who speak what is
Hmm.
on their mind, which is totally acceptable in today's society.
Yes,
But at that time,
but
it was
society was
like
not ready
unheard of.
at that time.
Yeah, that was unheard of. That was uncalled for. And so what happened is, because of those women, what happened, this belief, this that men should discipline their wives, reinstated, and it went back to a political that kind of society. And it moved, the progress they made, the women that
Hmm.
had made and demanded more freedom, actually backfired and went back. So that
Yes.
was also.
Okay, we will talk about Shakespeare's sonnet as well, that he wrote sonnet, and Shakespeare's sonnet were published in 1609, and we can say that this was this most celebrated collection of poetry in English literature, and it consisted of 154 sonnets. And if we talk about the themes, then these poems explore the theme of love, beauty, time, morality, and complexities of human relationship. So, if we talk about the format or the structure, then these sonnets were written in the form of 14 line, typically in iambic pentameter. And if we talk about 154 sonnets, then they are categorized into like
Ptolemy.
two kinds, like 126 sonnets, like addressed to a young man, and it talks about the youth and admiration and advice and sometimes the longing. And the remaining, they shift to the shift was focused to the dark lady, exploring a more complex and romantic relationship. So what
What I
is your
really
opinion,
like,
Nakia?
yeah, what I really like about these two distinctive, like separate eras of his
Hmm.
sonnets, right, is basically the first is basically about this fair youth, basically of
Yes.
what I is believing is someone who is in his early youth, coming to, you know, that age, and is very innocent, doesn't know much about the world, it is
Yes.
exploring and that kind of thing, right? So that's why the basically the
His growth
advice is
is
there.
evident in his work as well.
Exactly, exactly. So the advice is there, the
Yes.
longing of that youth and that fairness and that innocence is there, right? But the shift towards is like the dark lady. Do you see the fair youth
Yes.
and the dark
Dark
lady?
lady. Yes.
Because then the complexities come. Then
Transformation. We can see the
exactly,
transformation.
exactly. Even in the words, the adjective that he has chosen is just amazing to
Hmm.
me, and the shift drastically changes from basically even the titles of two of his famous sonnets from different eras is one
Hmm.
is basically shall I compare thee to a
Hmm.
summer's day, and the
Yes.
second is my mistress' eyes are nothing like a sun. So first is basically coming, oh, you are summer's day and blah blah
Huh.
blah, and the second is basically, oh, no.
Yes.
So I really like the contrast of his
Yes.
the themes, the titles, and everything. So
And
it's just
apart from
amazing.
theme, we can say that uh, his sonnets were renowned for their rich language, intricate wordplay, and profound exploration of emotions. You know, the poet grapples with the passage of time, immorality of verse, and enduring power of love. So let's talk about women in Shakespeare's writing, that how he portrayed the characters of women in his writing. And we know that if we talk about his plays, then the females were young and involved in romantic plot, and usually revolved around choosing a husband. So what is your opinion, Nakia, why he chose that specific scenario for his plays?
Well, basically, if we look at that time and that era, we do talk about that women did not have many rights, many things to explore.
Yes.
So the thing that
So
was
that
a
could be the
big
reason.
deal, yeah, that was a big deal, was choosing someone to marry or getting married.
Hmm.
That was like a woman's life cycle was like the top point was when she gets married, right?
Hmm.
So that is why these involved revolved around the woman trying to get married or about to get married. What further we explore is that the relationship of a father and daughter, which Shakespeare really explores. I guess it became with him becoming
Hmm.
a father as well,
Hmm.
but that was a really interesting point because
Hmm.
such simple arguments between a father and a daughter
Hmm.
about who she wants to get married and who he wants her to get married to raises so many quarrels and so many depths in the play as well. So, but what happens is that the majority of Shakespeare's play is basically two of his famous plays. If we talk about,
Hmm.
is Romeo and Juliet and
Yes.
Othello, and
Hmm.
these the women in these uh, are trying to basically is free themselves of male control. Right,
Yes.
they want to
Yes.
be like free of male control. When we talk about Juliet, she sneaks out of her house to marry the love of her life, which is
Hmm.
Romeo, and then fakes her own death to escape
The
the man,
husband
yeah, the husband that her
that
father
her
chose
father
for
has
her.
chosen for her.
Exactly, it's just to go against her wishes. And in contrast, is Othelio Desmond also sneaks out at night to marry
Hmm.
the man she has chosen against her father's wishes. So basically, we see them trying to break free of this system where their father control who they get married to.
Hmm.
But although this happens, what's the
Hmm.
tragedy in it? They cannot free themselves of the male control completely, because what happens is even though Juliet frees herself from her father, what comes next is she loses her husband in the fight between the two families at that time, you know. And Desmonda, what happens is her husband turns against her.
Yes.
He trusts the enemy more than he trusts
Hmm.
her, which is really tragic.
Yes. So I think that was the major problem of that era. The women were facing, I think, the conflict between, the moral code they have to follow or
Mhm.
their own wishes. So Shakespeare, I think, effectively addressed this problem in his plays. So also, Nakia, I have noticed one thing, that mothers were absent in his plays.
Yeah.
Like he never gave any major, role or the counterpart in his plays. So, what is your opinion? Why I think he was not close to his mother or something like this?
Well, what is basically mature women raised to, I guess, mature young female characters. When he writes about the female characters, they
Hmm.
are on uh, a path to explore, to adventure, to turn
Yes.
down the
Yes.
societal norms and these kind of stuff. But when we talk about a mother figure, what she does is she tries to mend over or become a bridge between her daughter and, you know, the
And
society, and try
yes.
to tame her somehow or some kind of thing. So I think just to highlight that
Yes.
aspect of the young female characters or characters that were there, he tried to not have a mother
And
character.
in Hamlet, we see a character of Gertrude. That is also not a very positive representation of
Of,
women. So I think like he was more focused on the representation of women as, you know, as embodiment of power, as embodiment of, you know, will, her own will, free will and choice. So I think that's why he was not focused on the women, on mother's character. Welcome back, listeners. You are watching and listening the program World of Shakespeare, and we are discussing the Shakespeare's writing, his genres of writing. His writing is majorly categorized into three types or kinds, we can say, and that is tragedy, comedy, and history. So far, we have covered, you know, the women in his era and how he portrayed women in his plays and sonnets as well. So Naqiya, let's move to the you know, the comedy. And as we have seen that Shakespeare tragedies usually feature a woman in secondary role, but in comedy, he the women were featured as the main character. What is your opinion?
yeah, it's like really fun to have them as main characters because it really revolves, all these plays actually revolve around these women who want to determine their own husbands, are in pursuit of their own husband. They don't want to follow the simple patriarchy of, you know, their fathers choosing the husband for them. And some of them are just trying to have adventures and fun that they are not allowed to have as like women. So we actually see a lot of dress overs, cross-dressing of women in male dressing. But before we go to that, we see that what is the similarity between the comedies of Shakespeare and the tragedies is, even though they are this apparent like freedom of them choosing their husband, they cannot actually free themselves of male control. There is always like this rounding back towards that patriarchy of it all, that, you know, the system is rooted deep in them. Even Olivia in 12th Night and
Yes.
Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing, they basically, they are determined not to marry at all, and at the end of these plays what happens is they decide to get married anyways. So yeah, so this is what even though they wanted to avoid marriage, all of it, they didn't even want to get married, they didn't even want to pursue any romantic interests. What happens is they are convinced, they are brought back to the circle of marriage and that kind of society, you know. So yeah, even though it is main characters, of course, seeing that with the keeping in mind the Elizabethan era, I guess it did give them a bit kind of sense of freedom,
Yes.
which in those circumstances,
Some sort of power
yeah,
as
some
well.
sort of power. But yeah, there was a lot of left to be done as well.
Yes, and in Twelfth Night we see the character of Viola, who was also disguises as a male character, you know, and in the Merchant of Venice, the, you know, the character Portia,
And Nerissa.
she's also, you know, represent the intelligent and a smart woman. So what
Exactly.
is your opinion, Naqiya, that why he was representing the women in disguised as men? I think like it shows, you know, how they, you know, they get the power the men were enjoying at that time.
Exactly. Also, this is this also allowed Shakespeare to explore women in an area where they are allowed to do things that are outside of their home, that are outside
Yes.
of marriage, you know, explore different adventures, explore different, just to add those level of depths. He, because of course at that time women weren't allowed to practice law or something, right? But he could do that with Portia when she disguised as a male and went to defend her husband, and which is, I think, the most powerful of
Yes.
moment when what happens is that in Shakespeare's plays, what I really like about it is that when these women dress up as men, because women are seen as someone less intelligent who can't accomplish anything
Who are
outside.
obedient.
Yeah, obedient or these kind of stuff. So when these women dress up as men, they actually do a better job than their male counterparts. They do, even when Portia goes into the court to defend her husband, many of the male lawyers were dumbfounded because they didn't know what to do about it, because they were just handstruck by Shylock, the merchant, who was demanding the pound of flesh from his heart.
Yes.
So the cleverness of Portia to actually say no jot of blood should be dropped in that process because you just want flesh, so no blood. So that really ingrains that, okay, women can do, but they're not allowed to at that time.
And in comparison, Naqiya, if we see that other writers also portrayed women as foolish, as obedient, or who don't know how to handle any complicated situation. But Shakespeare never did this thing.
Exactly, that is really commendable.
In Merchant of Venice, none of the male character think of a way to rescue Antonio from a contract that allowed the moneylender Shylock to take a pound of flesh from his body. But when Portia arrived in the court disguised as a lawyer, he did demonstrate a legal savvy that no other male character possessed. Portia brilliantly pointed out that Shylock may be legally entitled to a pound of Antonio flesh, but that no jot of blood can be spilled in the process. So I think that this play represent the women intelligence, women smartness, how Shakespeare highlighted this aspect of women, that they're also capable of doing complicated things, they're also capable of handling the complicated situation like this.
Exactly, because we see that women weren't allowed to study, so they couldn't practice law. So this becoming, having that power to go into the court full of men, may I add, when the male, the judge was a male, the other part, the other side of the court was male, even the witnesses, the jury, everyone was male. She as a woman going disguised as a man, that just shows power.
Yes. So let's come to tragedy, and the literary term we use, hamartia, that is the a tragic flaw in a protagonist. So what is your opinion that how Shakespeare used that hamartia in his character, and how he the hamartia drives the character throughout the play?
When we say that his tragedies were mainly associated with Aristotle's theory in poetics, so the protagonist had to be of noble birth. So a prince or a queen, and then of course the one tragic flaw that leads him towards it could be a negative trait, excessive pride, jealousy, something that will make him demand irrational things, and at the end of it, it will basically lead to his downfall. One of the biggest example, I think, is King Lear, because King Lear had this unreasonable desire for his daughters to express their unconditional love for him, and after that he falls for the lies of his eldest daughter and turns all of his inheritance to her, when actually the loving and caring daughter he had was Cordelia, his youngest daughter. And what happens is he doesn't realize it. This is another theme of hamartia. What happens is that they don't realize it until it's too late to be be undone. So it goes into the tragic fall and to their downfall. What happens is King Lear, he does recognize it, but at that point it has caused many deaths within the kingdom. It has caused the death of Cordelia, the only daughter who actually had faithful love for him, and at the end he dies himself. So this all actually turns out to be like a very just because he had this unreasonable demand for all of the daughters to come and tell him how much they love him, because what was that?
And my favorite play, Hamlet, it depicts an indecisiveness. We have this thing that either we should do this or not. So in Hamlet, the main protagonist is suffering from this that flaw, and also it represent our problem, like we also, and also the famous soliloquy, to be or not to be.
Exactly.
That is, I think, the masterpiece of English literature, that also depict our indecisiveness when doing something. And that in Hamlet, when the protagonist is want to take revenge, but he takes so much time that he couldn't do so.
Exactly. Also in Othello, what happens is that Macbeth's blindness to the meaning of the witch's prophecies convinces him he is invincible. So that also like leads him to inevitable failure, because of course him believing that he's invincible doesn't make him invincible. So of course each of these characters have this tragic flaw that make them, you know, just go through a kind of a journey towards downfall, step by
Yes.
step. What Shakespeare, these tragedies were influenced by Greek plays and Greek
Yes.
tragedies, and but they didn't actually encapsulate all of it, like every aspect of the Greek tragedy,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
interesting
Yes.
because of course Shakespeare is unique, if nothing,
Yes.
you
The
know.
chorus is missing even.
Exactly. So what happens in these tragedies is they focus on more of psychological complexities, like you said in Hamlet was inner turmoil. When we talk about Greek tragedies or the tragedies before that, they used to figure out external forces that were affecting the main character or the protagonist. But in this, they were more of internal turmoils or internal struggles that actually led to the downfall, like jealousy or pride or just struggling to what to,
Procrastination
yeah,
even.
exactly. So these kind of emotional variants and psychological complexities led as, you know, the main theme, main
Yes.
turmoils of these tragedies.
So we can say that Shakespeare tragedies offer the same kind of catharsis that Greek tragedies were said to provide. So when reading these plays or watching the movies as well, so we feel the roller coaster of emotion. We also feel catharsis at the
Of
end.
course.
That in the earlier episode I have also talked about this is the purpose of fiction. That we get exposure to the emotions and how to deal with it. So sometimes we get motivation, sometimes we get life lessons. So that's the beauty of fiction and also Shakespeare. So let's talk about comedy plays. So if there is a single element that unite all Shakespeare comedy, it is a wedding or the several wedding at the end of play.
Exactly.
So what is your opinion, Naqiya? Why he ended his comedy plays with a wedding?
I guess it just to have that happy ending feel of it. So like people know that, oh, nothing's gonna happen, it's gonna end in a wedding. Oh,
Yes.
doesn't like her, it's gonna end in a wedding, you know.
Yes.
Just whatever happens in the play, people don't take it seriously if it's comedy, because they know Shakespeare wrote it, oh, it's gonna end in a wedding. So that kind of adds, I guess, a bit of a comedic element to it as well.
So also we can say that although not all of the 14 plays classified as comedy in the first folio are particularly light-hearted or humorous, all end with at least marriage. So with marriage, he add that the humorous element or the happy element in his plays.
Exactly. So as I said, because people knew that these plays would gonna be end in like a happy ending, they didn't take the tragedies in a comedy or like, you know, any difficulty that characters did face in a comedy seriously, because they know that that discord is only temporary. It won't
Yes.
like, you know, it won't take long before it resolves or anything,
Yes.
that kind of thing. And what happened is that many of these comedies and the tragedies did actually, you know, resolve things before it went too far. Like there were two depictions of it, Much Ado About Nothing and Romeo and Juliet. Both feature a female character who fakes her death, right?
Yes.
But in Julio's depiction, her death actually leads to a series of real deaths happening at the end, which herself and Romeo die as well. But when we talk about Much Ado About Nothing, the hero's depiction is revealed before anyone can get any real harm. So even though she does fake her death and everything, it happens okay. Before any
Yes.
real harm is done, it's revealed to everyone.
Because the audience know that this court is only temporary, so we don't take the forcibles and the misfortune of characters seriously, and we trust that they will end the play happier, and then they begin. So the audience, they will not take seriously those turmoils or those the difficult circumstances the
Exactly.
character is facing. So that's the beauty of Shakespeare comedy. And then comes the history. So in addition to comedy and tragedy, the third classification for the Shakespeare play is in the first folio was history, and unlike two other genres, history play were determined by who they were about, not about they were about. And all the 10 history plays were named for and concerned the life of English monarch who ruled between 12th and 16th century. So Naqiya, he focused on the monarchs, the kings and the rulers. So why he chose the rulers for his writing of history?
I guess because that at that time the events were determined by who was leading or who was actually in power. That's how people saw that era, or that defined that era as, okay, that was, as we talk about Elizabethan era, we say it with the name of Queen Elizabeth. So of course we are defining it in a sense with the name of the ruler at that time, the monarch at that time. So I guess that influenced it really.
And also we should remember that the Shakespeare plays were not unbiased account. He interpreted events in the way aimed to secure the favor of ruling power of the day. So he favored the ruling power, or the ruling ruling power of the day, or the that the king of that time. So why he did that? I think the reason is obvious.
Yeah, because of course he was in Queen Elizabeth era, and what happened is, of course, he couldn't actually say something against her. That would be, and tragically. And what he did, he used to praise her family.
The punishments were very strict at that time.
Of course, and of course, the publications and what was actually being played at that time was monitored as well. So if you wrote something against the monarch of that time, well, and when we talk about that, we see that Queen Elizabeth was already struggling in the face of male doubt. Like, people were already, they were trying to doubt her, and she was trying to prove herself as a single female ruler, at that time. And when someone would try to make something bad about it, of course, I imagine the punishment would be really severe.
Yes. And also, his portrayal of Richard III as evil, scheming ruler has become the standard interpretation of the king. But in fact, we know little evidence of what Richard was really like. So we can't say that his depiction was accurate.
So we can take him as a historian. What we can take him as, we can take these works as fiction as well, or what Shakespeare thought of what the monarchs stood for, or what they are.
I think he showcased his opinion only.
Exactly.
That what he thought about that ruler of that time.
Yeah.
So I think we should end this discussion here, and I want to end this literary discussion with the message that we need fiction, and that's why we have started this program. That fiction allows us to to experience emotions, to experience the things that we can't experience in our single life. So if we read other works, so we can get the motivation, get the life lessons, or even we get the feeling of catharsis, as we discussed today in his tragedy plays. So these feelings are important for our survival, for our escapism. The life is, sometimes life gives us so much suffering. So I think fiction provides escapism that nothing in the world can provide. So that's the beauty of fiction. So I will urge you to read fiction as much as you can, so that you can spend your life happily and with satisfaction. So yeah, that's all for today, and thank you so much, Naqiya, for your contribution, and see you in another episode. This is your host, Areeba Saleem. Allah Hafiz.